It's 6 o'clock in the morning. The sun is just starting to rise. You, as well as many others, are waiting for the day ahead. Some have work, some are headed to see family, some are on vacation. A collection of many people with different destinations, but all are gathered at the same starting point, the depot. From farther away, you start to hear the constant chugging of the engine and the blast of the whistle. You can smell the familiar aroma of smoke coming from your ride. Everyone nears the edge of the track. The long black contraption comes closer into view. The wheels screech to a halt, and everyone piles onto the machine. You feel the engine slowly start to move along the tracks. Soon you are headed off to your destination, faster than ever before. You see places pass by you so quickly, you wonder how this beast could ever manage to stop. It's just another day of riding the train. Ever since trains started appearing in the Western Maryland area in the mid-1800s, they have impacted the region in countless ways. The railroads have been influential in providing jobs. They have increased revenue for the tri-state area. They have also brought many tourists and potential residents to the district, specifically to Cumberland and Frostburg. More recently, the trains have provided entertainment such as leisurely rides, the murder mystery train, and the Polar Express train for children around Christmas time. The Western Maryland Scenic has even brought the host of Jeopardy, Alex Trebek, as well as interest from a major motion picture company to the 16-mile steam-powered railroad. Running everywhere from Piedmont to Cumberland to Frostburg to Mount Savage, the central trains of the Western Maryland area include the Cumberland and Pennsylvania, Baltimore and Ohio, the Georges Creek and Cumberland, the Western Maryland, and the Western Maryland Scenic. Trains were not the only popular form of railway transportation. Trolleys also carried people from place to place until buses became more prominent. Although they were somewhat supplanted by cars, airplanes, subways, and semi-trucks, trains are still a critical part of Western Maryland history. From carrying coal to carrying people, railways have had a deep impact on our area. Through stories, pictures, and recollections, the people of Western Maryland remember the life and impact of their railways. "165 years ago, the Cumberland and Pennsylvania Railroad allowed for the export of coal from Georges Creek Valley to the rest of the world, bringing in population, jobs, and capital. One of the most prominent railroads in the area, the C&P was incorporated on March 4, 1850 because of the overwhelming need to transport coal, which was the primary element of industry in the 19th century. The C&P operated primarily in Allegheny County, with minor parts of the track located in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. As well as providing transportation for coal, the 38-mile line also offered passenger excursions. It was a railroad that operated predominantly on steam, never operating a diesel locomotive. It took people to the mines to work, as well as to Cumberland to shop. The C&P was known for bringing the mail to town, while delivering crates of chicks and shipping out fine silk cloth and everyday glassware, as well as transporting coal from the tipple to the furnaces efficiently. Over 600 men were carried on the payroll during the turn of the century whenever the train rode the rails all day and half the night. The Cumberland and Pennsylvania Railroad exemplifies the type of development that helped launch the United States into the Industrial Revolution. In 1844, in the small town of Mount Savage, the first iron rail was produced in the United States, connecting Mount Savage with Cumberland. The Mount Savage Railroad operation was acquired by the Cumberland and Pennsylvania Railroad in January of 1854. It brought in $1.5 million in rolling stock for the C&P. The Eckerd branch was absorbed into the C&P in the year 1870. The C&P took 2 round trips a day from Cumberland to Eckerd. The tea kettles, as the small steam locomotives were known, could only haul 10 empties at a time back to Eckerd. In 1944, when the C&P was acquired by the Western Maryland, it ended the run to Eckerd and removed the track. The Georges Creek Railroad was built in 1853 to allow shipment of iron products from the iron furnace in Lonaconing to the Plan Canal and Railroad terminus in Westernport. Fired in 1839, it was the first iron furnace in America to successfully use coal and coke fuel rather than charcoal to produce pig iron. The coke was made in the mounds called ricks. Built from locally quarried sandstone, it produced nearly 75 tons of cast iron per week at the peak of its production. In addition, the massive furnace used to make dowels for the C&O's Canal's lock walls. This commercial furnace continued to produce iron ore until 1856. Today, the iron furnace remains intact in Lonaconing as the centerpiece of a community park. Also in that year, the iron ore was exhausted, the C&P extended with Georges Creek, and in 1863, the C&P officially purchased the Georges Creek Railroad for $250,000.
They hit a choke point in the Narrows on the east side of Cumberland. Nowadays, if you were in Cumberland looking, say, north through the Narrows, there's rail lines on both sides. The B&O and the C&P were on the right-hand side. The Western Maryland, originally the Georges Creek and Cumberland, was on the left-hand side. So when you get down out of the Narrows and get into town, there's a choke point there. And the C&P had already crossed Wills Creek and was going down to where they could load both on the trains and the canal boats. And the Georges Creek and Cumberland needed to get across there. And the C&P, after they were asked politely, said no. After they were sued, they said no. So the Georges Creek and Cumberland trackmen went out late at night and made the crossing. And the C&P guys came out early in the morning and took it out again. So there were a few arguments going on. The police were called in, et cetera, et cetera. Eventually it was resolved that they could do the crossing and just, do it and don't. When the crossing was actually made, the C&P parked an engine on it so that it was at that level. So there was really an immense rivalry.
In order to connect the small railways between Westernport and Frostburg, a tunnel under Main Street was essential. The C&P tunnel, which was unearthed in 1857, was constructed with a semicircular arched opening that was made of American common bond brick and surfaced with unsmooth cement. It was said to be a major engineering accomplishment that was the primary link for hauling coal in bulk. Another major accomplishment included the then new Consolidation Coal Company starting to take control of the C&P in 1860, which it continued to control for the rest of its life. The C&P took pride in the locomotives it built itself in the Mount Savage shops, where the headquarters were located. However, its earliest locomotives were acquired from other lines through acquisition. 1883 marked the start of the thriving period of manufacturing for its own locomotives in Mount Savage. Thomas B. Innes and Company of Broadway, New York, who served as C&P's agent, issued them a successful locomotive catalog listing 5 basic types of engines along with their specifications. It then began to make sales to other railroads, which helped to finance production for the roads and employment. It took pride in its craftsmanship, which was signified by silver lead lettering and polished smoke boxes. The engines produced in Mount Savage ended up all across the United States.
with some even going to Cuba, Central and South America, and Europe for World War I. When the CMP was in the process of being sold, 8 out of the 11 locomotives it was restoring at the time were sent to the Maryland Junction in 1944 to be scrapped. All in all, the CMP prospered as it produced around 32 locomotives in its lifetime. The Great Depression of the 1930s affected Allegheny County significantly. After its peak in 1907, where it produced 2.3 million tons of coal shipments started to decrease. Operators were forced to sell coal for less than its cost to produce it. In addition, highway competition took its toll on the CMP after pushing the Cumberland and Westernport Electric out of service. In 1942, the Cumberland and Pennsylvania put an end to its passenger service. Car 101 took its last run in the end of August and was sold to the New York, Susquehanna, and Western. It eventually transformed into the number 3002 and survived into the early 1950s. Since the CMP no longer had need for passenger stock, it was forced to look for a potential buyer. A buyer in the U.S. government purchased all of its old coaches and shipped them south to Panama. The Depression gave way to the Consolidation Coal Company's own financial obstacles in the early 1940s. In order to make a profit, the company looked for a potential buyer for what was said to be its most readily saleable asset, the CMP. The Western Maryland Railway submitted a bid, and on May 12, 1944, it became the owner of the CMP's entire capital stock for a mere price of $1.1 million cash. The CMP officially went out of existence when the line formally merged into the Western Maryland Railway on September 1, 1953. Exactly 1 year after the merger, the CMP branch of the Western Maryland was completely disassembled, except for the Frostburg Tunnel, which was used until the 1980s. According to Dean Melander in the book Cumberland and Pennsylvania Railroad, Western Maryland's historic coal carrier, the CMP was born in the Iron Age, grew up and prospered in the Coal Age, and almost died in the Atomic Age, eventually transforming into 97.4 miles of track, 46 bridges, 3 tunnels, and 9 depots. The Cumberland and Pennsylvania Railroad will be remembered for its ability to haul massive amounts of coal efficiently. On Independence Day in 1828, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, the nation's first common carrier, broke ground the same day as its biggest competition, the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. The intent for both modes of transportation was to meet the Ohio River. However, many obstacles, geographical included, stood in the way. For the canal, the Paw Paw Bends proved to be an immense challenge to overcome. Therefore, it was forced to find an alternate route through the mountains.
When the B&O started building, they built initially the line south to Ellicott's Mills, and that was drawn by horses. And they had heard about this interesting technology developed in Britain called steam locomotives. And they thought that there might be something to that, but they hedged their bets because when they were laying out the line that went toward Frederick, there were 2 fairly steep areas there. And they thought, okay, we can use the horses to get the train to the base of this mountain, and then we'll put a stationary steam engine with a cable at the top and pull them up that because the horses won't be able to do it, reassemble the train at the top and send them down the other side. That was the plan. And they were able to get a couple of locally produced, as in York, Pennsylvania, locomotives, and did a little test on their line, and they said, hey, these actually work. Maybe we don't need the whole horse stationary engine thing after all, which is what turned out that actually happened. So the whole locomotive technology developed in England, they got just enough information over about it and were able to reproduce the technology and make it work.
By the time it was finished, the B&O had already beaten its competition by reaching Cumberland first in 1842, 8 years ahead of the C&O. Allegheny County was now embarking into the new era considered the golden age of industry. Cumberland, a destination 179 miles from Baltimore, became the primary exchange and transshipment center as it was the farthest point west by rail thus far. Hence, the title Queen City was bestowed to this center in the Alleghenies between the Atlantic Ocean and the Ohio River. The Queen City Hotel attracted local citizens and tourists and was said to be a magnificent hotel featuring marble fireplaces, exquisite chandeliers, and a plush dining room. The coal industry started to develop as the element of coal was discovered by accident near the mouth of the Savage River. 1751 marked the first recorded coal mine near George's Creek when a Fry and Jefferson map printed the words coal mine. The B&O, being one of the nation's largest railroads, signified the importance of intertwining modern transportation with coal transportation for interdependency. The B&O eventually was forced into receivership during the Depression of 1893. For 10 years, it was controlled by its arch rival, the Pennsylvania Railroad, a massive corporation. In the 70 years to follow, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad continued to financially decline. The Chesapeake and Ohio Railway officially took control of the B&O in 1963, beginning what was to become the Chessie system.
Well, the Chessie system began in 1987, and it was a consolidation of a number of different railroads on the East Coast. Back in the 1960s, the B&O Railroad to Baltimore and Ohio was financially strapped, and it was purchased by the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad, which operated south of here in the state of Virginia. Beyond that, there were consolidations with other railroads. The B&O C&O merged with lines like the Louisville and Nashville, the Atlantic Coast Line, the Seaboard, which eventually became the Seaboard Coast Line, and those railroads were consolidated into the Chessie system.
Because it lacked self-sufficiency, the Chessie system merged with the Family Line system to become the CSX Corporation 17 years later. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad chugged along for over 180 years with a slogan linking 13 great states with the nation. It will forever leave behind the legacy of evolving the area's economy and expanding the mining industry. Constructed to compete with the Cumberland and Pennsylvania Railroad, the George's Creek and Cumberland Railroad was developed. It was the product of two major mining companies, the Maryland Coal Company and the American Coal Company. Before laying the tracks, charters had to be modified to authorize the construction of railroads. The C&P, at the time owned by the Consolidated Coal Company, controlled its transportation monopoly.
Right now, there are a half a dozen or more small coal companies in George's Creek. And since the 1950s, when Consolidated Coal Company left this area, it has been dominated, the coal business has been dominated by small family-owned mines.
The competition forced the GC&C to move past the C&P into Cumberland. The race was on to fight for the right to reach the canal over the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad tracks. The B&O refused to grant rights to the GC&C. However, the controversy was resolved in court.
When the George's Creek and Cumberland was formed, and it was formed by New York money to get coal to the Pennsy Railroad, they went to the C&P, and they found this guy who was the general manager of the facility in Mount Savage at the time, Jim Milholland. And they said, how would you like to be the president of a new railroad? This is a pretty good opportunity for him. So even though he was second generation C&P, he took that opportunity to be president of the Georges Creek and Cumberland.
The track went through Claryville and Vale Summit into Lonaconing to service the mines and to Cumberland, following Interstate 68. The January 18, 1887 published schedule of the GC&C shows it ran 2 trains per day, except for Sunday from Cumberland to Lonaconing. Each line had its own passenger stations and services, although coal was the primary cargo to transport along these tracks. The track crossed the town on a large wooden trestle until the trestle was removed in the 1930s as the track began to decline in use. Today, the track can no longer be found as the line was only operated until 1939. The Georges Creek in Cumberland was self-run for many years until a financial crisis occurred in 1907. By 1913, the Western Maryland have taken over the GC&C, where the lines connected in the Narrows at the Iron Truss Bridge. However, the GC&C will always be considered a small but key part of the Jay Gould master plan to construct a transcontinental railroad. In the late 1800s, another popular form of railway transportation began to emerge in Allegheny County. The decline in railroad profits and first-hand accounts of being environmentally unsafe led to the organization of the Cumberland Electric Railway.
The first trolley in Allegheny County was created in Cumberland, Maryland. It was a result of 3 entrepreneurs pooling their resources. Their last names were Landwehr, Roberts, and Holtshoe. And they took a risk. They thought that a trolley system in the local area would be profitable. So they constructed a trolley line from the corner of Baltimore and North Center Street, out Center Street, through the Cumberland Narrows to what became Narrows Park. And people were skeptical. They said it wouldn't work. They poked fun at it. You know, trolleys were relatively new. The first trolley system was developed in 1888, and this was only 1891. So it wasn't that familiar to most people. Those 3 gentlemen formed the Cumberland Electric Railway. It was constructed pretty much without difficulty. They built a car barn on North Center Street for servicing of the hardware, and they had a power station on Union Street that supplied the DC power to Narrows Park. So that's when it began, 1891.
On a Thursday morning, July 2nd, 1891, at 9:15 a.m., the first trolley ran in Allegheny County on a shakedown run, and 2 days later, the trolley took its first inaugurated run, opening to the public. Between 11 and 12,000 passengers were carried on the streetcar in only 3 hours and 15 minutes. The Frostburg, Eckert, and Cumberland Electric Railroad was consolidated with the Lonaconing, Midland, and Frostburg Railway Company to form the Cumberland and Westernport Electric Railway after smaller trolley lines were incorporated in 1901. The new line ran from Cumberland to Frostburg and turned south at the trolley station, which is still located on present-day Water Street. It then traveled towards Georges Creek in Westernport. At the time it was inaugurated, passengers could ride for a fare of 5 cents from North Center Street to Narrows Park, a location popular for its roller coaster, miniature railroad, and skating ring, or right next door to Clausen's baseball field.
The Cumberland Electric Railway was responsible for the development of an amusement park. The entrepreneurs that I had mentioned previously knew that most people in those days worked 6 days a week. And they had a great idea. They thought, you know, we can create a market for the Sunday folks too, who in those days virtually everybody had Sunday off. So they put their resources into a park in the Narrows. And they purchased a grove owned by the Seiss family. And they built an amusement park. Now it had a Ferris wheel, a miniature train, skating rink, and what was called a bandstand. That was an enclosed area for dances. And it was the most popular amusement park / picnic area in Allegheny County.
After the consolidation, fares went up to 30 cents for a ride to Frostburg and 90 cents for a ride from Cumberland to Westernport. In addition to offering riders an alternative to the railroad, streetcars were initially able to turn a greater profit than their competitors. On April 24, 1902, the very first electric streetcar arrived at Frostburg and caused quite a commotion.
Oh yes, it was a big deal. It was covered by the Cumberland newspaper, the Alleghenian, and there were hundreds of people, maybe even thousands, that showed up. And the reporter took great pains to detail the individuals that showed up. The reporter also indicated there were lots of country folk who showed up to watch. And he recorded that they had an expression of fear on their face, because after all, they were used to steam locomotives, and they would hiss and make lots of noise, and they were powerful, almost living, breathing beings. And here came this trolley whizzing along, and he said they had fear in their eyes, and that one of them remarked that the trolley was the result of His Satanic Majesty's machinations. Trolleys were the devil's handiwork. And then after the trolley moved down Center Street, their expression changed from one of fear to almost admiration. So I guess they were accepted by everybody on the spot, but it was a big event in the history of Cumberland. And then the reporter made the comment that the waters of Wills Creek would tell the waters of the Potomac River, when they met at Cumberland, that there would never be such an event to pass through the Narrows again.
It departed Frostburg at 6 a.m. every morning and arrived at Narrows Park at 6:40, with runs continuing on the hour, every hour. The trolley was designed to be double-ended, meaning the motorman would use controls at the other end while the conductor would reverse seats, because the rail system lacked a roundabout. Close to 30 years after its incorporation in the area, the trolley faced a significant decline from 1925 to 1928, forced out of business by new means of transportation. Automobiles became more affordable in the 1920s due to the birth of Henry Ford's Model T, and buses allowed for more accessibility among passengers. Roads needed to be improved to compensate for these advancements. Therefore, this diminished the demand for the expansion of trolley tracks.
Toward the end of trolley service in the 1920s, there were many more automobiles on the road, and they were competing for the same space as the trolley. Well, the trolley was a positive thing at first. It was welcomed, but as more and more people began to purchase cars through mass production of automobiles and the price coming down, trolleys began to transition to kind of a nuisance. So the trolley would be traveling down Center Street, and there's many accounts of motorists becoming impatient with the trolley cars. They would stop on a regular basis every other block. So the motorists in the vehicles would go up onto the sidewalk and drive the car down the sidewalk. And then the shop owners would come out of the store and start yelling, at the motorist who's driving the car down the sidewalk. So there's this competition between cars and trolleys. And eventually it got to the point where people complained to the city that the trolleys were being almost a nuisance. And they asked them to be removed.
The Cumberland and Westernport equipment, franchise, and property were sold for a grand total of $50,000. 1927 marked the end of the cable car service between Frostburg and Cumberland, and May 16, 1932, at 1:30 a.m., signaled the very last time the car would enter the North Center Street service barn in Cumberland.
The market changed. The times had changed. Transportation got the price of a new vehicle down to, you may remember, is it $600 or $300? I forget what Henry Ford offered his cars for sale. Now that was a new vehicle. Used vehicles obviously were at a discount to that retail price. So even working class people were able to acquire automobiles. People then opted for private transportation as opposed to public transportation. Now we look at what has happened. More and more people acquiring more and more vehicles have virtually choked cities. And it's so ironic because urban areas now are developing what is called light rail transportation. Many of those are nothing but trolleys by another name, and they're using the same right-of-way areas that trolleys used to use. So we're kind of wishing that we would have kept them, or we want to go back to trolleys. So we're back to in need of mass transportation, public transportation, which is what we had, and it was accepted.
By the year 1852, the Western Maryland Railroad started to take form as an agricultural railroad. It was primarily used for the transporting of coal and freight. However, a minor part of the railroad was set aside for the hauling of passengers. The main reason the railroad moved west was to bring coal and resources from our area east to Baltimore. 20 original miles of track was developed into approximately 700 miles, spanning operation over Maryland, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Rough terrain and numerous tunnels and bridges didn't stand in the way of the construction of the railroad and its need to establish a manageable grade. However, construction took a halt at the Union Bridge 10 years after its debut during the Civil War. The line was seized briefly by the Union Army during the Battle of Gettysburg. More recently, a community task force, known as the Neighborhood First, commissioned a program to decorate a railroad underpass built by the railroad. This mural project was given the name Roses for the Wild Mary, thus establishing the nickname of Wild Mary for the Western Maryland Railroad. Baltimore owned a large portion of its stock in mortgage bonds. Because the Western Maryland was continually growing deeper in debt, the city was seeking a buyer to take over the railroad system. It eventually approved Fuller Syndicate's offer, a company that represented George Gould. As the son of financier and railroad developer Jay Gould, he put in the lowest bid while still guaranteeing full payment of the liabilities. In 1910, the B&O went into receivership. It would no longer be considered a railroad, but the Western Maryland Railway. Under Gould's direction, the Western Maryland Railway would move west towards the Queen City of Cumberland and met with West Virginia Central, marking the start of an 86-mile extension. In 1944, the Consolidation Coal Company sold its subsidiary, the Cumberland and Pennsylvania Railroad, to the Western Maryland. The Western Maryland then replaced the repair operations and equipment with its own at Mount Savage. By the year 1973, the Western Maryland Railway merged into the Chessie system, whose B&O double track ran parallel to its own single track. Today, only small sections of the track are still active, with the most famous still being used by the Western Maryland Scenic at Homesteaders Curve and other segments operated by the West Virginia Central. Throughout its legendary lifetime, the Wild Mary earned its reputation as the fast freight line, and prided itself on being extremely efficient along with operating quality freight service. Today, the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad operates between Frostburg and Cumberland, using 14.38 miles of the former Western Maryland Railroad track. It began its operation in 1988 and continues to use both steam and diesel locomotives.
One of the reasons why railroads run diesel locomotives today is they're about twice as efficient and require much less maintenance on a general basis than what a steam locomotive does. Steam locomotives actually cost us about twice as much to run and operate and maintain as what it does for a diesel. So it's a lot more expensive to run the steam locomotive. From what we've looked at, the steam locomotive actually draws about 30% of our business. So in other words, 30% of our customers come there because of a steam locomotive. And the problem with that is, when it costs you twice as much to run, but it's adding to your revenues, there's always that benefit and trade-off there. Do you continue with steam, which we're going to because, it's neat and it draws additional tourism in, but it is more expensive, so it makes it tougher to operate.
The Scenic provides passenger excursion rides in first class and coach services, as well as reserve caboose rides and specialty seasonal trips. The 734 runs a murder mystery train on various Saturdays from June to November. Local actors participate in this event, and passengers must solve the murder. Around Christmas time, a Polar Express train is offered for children to meet Santa and enjoy the holiday season. There's also a special opportunity for individuals to be an engineer for a day. They are permitted to ride in the cab of the locomotive, feeling the powerful engine and true experience on the rails. The Western Maryland Scenic appealed to the area with its lodging, shopping, dining, events, and attractions. The Frostburg Depot was built in 1891 by the Cumberland and Pennsylvania Railroad Company.
The history of the depot in Frostburg was built in 1891, and it was one of about four other or that same design depot. There's was about four total of those that were all built along the same design. The main one was actually in Mount Savage, which unfortunately is no longer there.
The CMP managed to connect the area to the B&O, Western Maryland, and Pennsylvania railroads. In 1942, when car travel on the National Road began to make the rail service unsustainable, the small, local railroad service was discontinued. In 1973, the depot was abandoned, only to be restored years later in 1989 with a restaurant, which is no longer in operation, and shops. A unique experience to the area for passengers is watching the turntable rotate the steam engine on the Scenic Railroad excursions for the return trip to Cumberland. Only 88 steps separate the depot from the town of Frostburg and all it has to offer.
We have international tourism that comes to Frostburg because of this. When we talk about social media and how things are going in the early 21st century, on our Facebook page, we have people from 45 different countries who follow us. That's really an amazing thing to think that what we're doing here in Cumberland and Frostburg, there's people worldwide that want to come here to ride this. And it's really both humbling as well as a little nerve-wracking to think, hey, every day we've got to go out and we've got to put on the best show that we can. Because this might be some people's honeymoon trip. I remember a couple just 2 weeks ago, met them here on the streets of Frostburg as I was walking through, and they were talking about the train, so I wanted to make sure that their experience was okay. It was their third anniversary. They scraped enough money to come here, and they were eating at the Offbeat Bistro, and this was their third anniversary. Starting out, they didn't have a whole lot, and this is what they saved up to come to do. So and very glad that we gave them a really great memory, and to do that for 40,000 people a year is pretty. It's very exciting.
Other portions of the former Western Maryland Railway are now rail trails. The Scenic serves as the trailhead for the Great Allegheny Passage, a trail offering 141 miles of hiking and biking in Maryland and Pennsylvania. The Allegheny Highland Trails of Maryland, which is part of the Great Allegheny Passage bicycle trail from Cumberland to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, runs along its route. The Western Maryland Scenic continues to attract people as it travels through the mountain scenery of the area, including the famous Helmsetter's Curve. The Mountain Thunder provides a brief glimpse into the history of its transportation while its passengers are all aboard. From the mid-1800s to the mid-1900s, The railways of Western Maryland have made a lasting impression on our area. The trains and trolleys have progressed through the years, impacting our area and are still remembered in the many ways today. Although railway transportation was considered advanced machinery at the time it was introduced, it was still able to progress in many ways through its lifetime. Most of the trains started as carrier trains, primarily used to carry coal from place to place. Eventually, passenger excursions began to emerge and become more popular. The railways have left many impressions on our area. They have provided several job opportunities. They have also helped bring people to our rural area.
I remember a couple from Germany last year who didn't even know that the train was here, but we're down at the station enjoying lunch at the Trail Inn, and all of a sudden, this big steam locomotive comes up with a passenger train behind it, and they were just ecstatic watching it turn on the turntable. I mean, they were just having a great time, and they actually came back again this year just to come back to see the trains.
Railway transportation has had an impact on our economy by bringing people to our area, increasing revenue, and expanding business. Of course, the railways have had a huge impact on transportation as well. This was the first time that hundreds of people could move to several different destinations at the same time. Railway transportation has paved the way for other forms of transportation. Even though many of the railways in our area are no longer in use, they are still remembered and preserved in several ways. Aside from the remaining decommissioned tracks that can still be seen sporadically throughout the area, the railways are survived by people and events. The trolley is remembered by the special bus, designed to look like a trolley that rides around Frostburg. The trains and railroads are remembered in countless ways. The Community Model Railroad Club meets once a week in Frostburg City's place and also takes trips to further their knowledge of Western Maryland trains and trains in general. The Rails Fest, held in Canal Place in Cumberland, also celebrates the life and impact of our area's trains. The most important preservation of all, the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad, which includes parts of the old Western Maryland and CNP track, is the only line in our area that the community can still enjoy for themselves. These recollections allow us to be transported to a time where we can remember the life and impact of the Western Maryland Railway.